Today we're going to talk about three sisters, successes and failures. Now let me back up so you can see. Here, for those of you who may not know, that is my 2x2, 2 foot by 2 foot cornfield. So that is a 4 square foot corn patch. Right next to it, you can see my bean patch. Now, there is beans growing through the corn patch. This is what I could call a successful Three Sisters planting. I'm going to show you I have a small melon plant growing in here too. I'm sorry, we're going through the corn patch. Okay, that is the small melon plant. I don't consider that particularly successful. It is flowering, but it's not as lush as one that's not growing in the corn patch. So that is success and lack of success there. So I'm going to discuss how I was successful growing the beans and corn side by side. Now, the whole idea of growing beans and corn is to use the corn as a trellis for the bean plants. In the process, one would hope that both plants will grow to their full maturity and fruit to their full maturity and companion one another. So like help each other along as friends. Well, ironically, my beans grew up last year's sorghum canes. Sorghum is in the corn family, and it did provide the canes for the beans to grow up. The sorghum plants are stunted. If you look closely, you can see last year's sorghum plants grew about 10 foot tall, whereas this year's sorghum plants are only about 3 foot tall. Lots of sorghum, no big deal. We grow sorghum for that top right there, and I wasn't growing this sorghum to make syrup, although this is the sorghum that you do make syrup out of. If I'd have been growing it for the sorghum canes to make syrup, then this would have been a fail, because the bean plants were successful. They are growing very, very successfully to their height, but the sorghum plants are stunted. Now over here in the corn patch, the corn here, this is my corn, and it is between the average corn plant in there is between, I guess, 8 to 10 foot tall. So lots of them are still growing. The corn is planted very tight, and the corn has obviously reached its, it's reached its top height. Some people say this particular corn grows only 6 foot for them, and I have some shorter ones because I planted it tight. But I got a lot of corn there that is, as you can see, quite tall. It is 10 foot tall, some more than 10 foot tall, and a large majority of it is at least 8 foot tall. They are all productive. There is corn on them, and the corn are full size. They're not filled out yet. They're young corn, but you can look at them and see that they are going to be full-size corn. They're not short, stunted plants at all. Now, I did plant beans in here. You can see the beans at the base of the corn plant. You think the beans in here are stunted. How come they don't look like the other beans? Because I just planted these beans maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. The corn here was over 6 foot tall when I planted the beans. So at that point, this corn could use some nitrogen fixation at the soil, and I planted the beans when the corn was over 6 foot tall. This is an old-fashioned corn, so it gets quite tall, and it hadn't started flowering yet, so there was it hadn't started producing corn silks. When the first flower was produced on this corn, I then went out and planted my bean seeds. And let us see how the beans are doing. As you can see, the beans are crawling up the pole. The leaves are not nearly as big as the other bean leaves, But this time of year, I can't normally plant beans because it's too hot and they really suffer in the full sun. So these beans are nice and green and they're doing quite well in the shade of the corn. The corn's still outgrowing them because they were started late, but I know they will catch up and it will give me an opportunity to have a second bean harvest, because the bean would cut off in the August sun in California, die down, and then come back up in September or October. So this is really, really successful. Now, as I said, this plant here, this melon plant, is not that successful because the melon is not at its full potential. I'm going to come over here and show you a melon plant that's not growing with corn. This is the same melon plant. As you can see, it's much bigger. It's got a lot of flowers. This is in a sunnier location. So that doesn't seem to be working out so well with the Three Sisters. So I would say, if you're planting Three Sisters, plant your corn first. And don't go by, oh, after your corn gets 1 foot tall. No, make sure your corn is at least full size, as tall to the point where if it didn't grow any taller, you would be okay. We're in the cornfield. I'm going to show you a plant. This is my Amish pie pumpkin that we're going in to take a look at here. I got to get out of the shade of the corn patch. I planted everything in the shade of the corn patch so that I could plant in the hottest part of my summer. This is my Amish pie pumpkin. Now, if you look at it, it's kind of stunted. It is the pumpkin squash that I planted with my corn. This is my second planting of corn. It's planted on a high hill to give the pumpkin the nutrients that it needs. The corn's growing fine, but the pumpkin, on the other hand, is sorry about that. The pumpkin, on the other hand, is kind of balking at the process. The leaves aren't big. They're very, very small leaves, and the Amish pie pumpkin leaves, like all pumpkin leaves, get really, really tall. But the beans are doing well that I planted over here. I'm starting to see some signs of mildew on this planting, and last year my Amish pie pumpkin got no mildew. Not worried about the mildew here, but next year I will plant the Amish pie pumpkin in a fuller sun location, and I will have to figure out a way to get it to be full-size leaves. Now I'm going to show you another pumpkin that I did not plant in a Three Sisters format or so closely. This is my Amish pie pumpkin. Can you see the big pumpkin leaves? And I grow my pumpkin for the leaves, guys. I don't grow pumpkin for pumpkin. So the leaves are very important to me. That's what I eat. I want lots of leaves. I want 40-foot long plants with a ton of new leaves at all times. And this plant, the leaves are like 4 times the size of the leaves of the other plant, and it's planted in its own enclave between 2 trees. The trees have very, very deep roots. The only thing close to it is the boysenberry plant, and the beans are at a distance from it. So if you plant pumpkin, I would say plant your pumpkin in a space of its own next to your corn, but where the roots of the pumpkin plant has a like its own 2 by 2 foot area for the roots to really go into some good soil. There is no disease on this pumpkin. There's no mildew. Both the Amish pie pumpkin and this Long Island cheese pumpkin are resistant to mildew and disease, so they do not get a lot of that. My garden has, in Southern California, has all kind of nematodes and stuff like that, so I can't grow a lot of the squash that everybody else grows. The hybrids just die on me. The nematodes and the disease in the soil take them out. So I do have to plant the Three Sisters because I need the corn to go in there and reduce the nematode population. But this is what I discovered in my garden this year. The leaves of the Long Island cheese pumpkin are full-size pumpkin leaves. The plants are no bigger, they're no longer, they're the same length, same size, but because it had 2 by 2 foot area with no other competition from a fast grower, it is able to size up its leaves. Then you go over here, this plant is the same length. It's a very productive plant, but it's suffering from a little mildew in the shaded spot. It's obviously growing towards the sun. It is a pumpkin, so I'm certain that it'll be very successful at that. And maybe I'll be able to come back with a good luck story later on, because this pumpkin is almost perennial in my area. Last year it didn't die until January. I'm hoping for the same thing this year. I'm hoping that this plant lives all the way until January. So the corn will die after it fruits, and the roots will then fertilize the pumpkin plant. I did grow this Amish pie pumpkin with sorghum last year, and when the sorghum roots died, the pumpkin grew like 3 to 5 foot a day. So I'm hoping that that'll happen this year. But I've learned my lesson, and I hope that I've shared some information with you about how to be successful at Three Sisters, so that every plant that you grow in your Three Sisters can grow successfully. In synopsis, plant your corn first, let your corn get full size, and as soon as your corn goes to flower, plant your beans as your understory for the corn in the heat of summer. And as far as your pumpkin is concerned, don't plant pumpkin right in the space where the corn is. Plant your pumpkin where it has its own space and nothing is growing in the same area as its roots, so that it can soak up all the nutrients in that soil and grow lush and full and happy. Thank you for watching this video. Jesus loves you, and I love you with all of the Jesus in me. Be blessed, beautiful. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed, and leave a comment below. Are you growing Three Sisters? Are you interested? Are you doing your research like I did before I grew it? I'm not going to just go away without giving you updates. If you go back and look at my old gardening videos, I tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. My garden is an attempt at sustainable gardening, not productive gardening. So I am attempting to find a way to sustainably garden so that I can produce food year after year for myself, the animals, and the insects. Yeah, that's a new concept. Also, I think about the insects, not just the bees. I think about the caterpillars. What about you?